underneath here, if I rotate it. And that the tusk is turning slightly. Whereas these two tusks here are actually just curved in one plane. They're quite flat here on the bench, but just curved like that. Immediately I began to realise they're quite different.
He got permission to take a small sample of the ivory for carbon-14 dating. He sent it to Oxford University.
I analysed it and wrote back that we came with a date of about 290 years old, plus or minus about 100 years, and they cannot be mammoths. They must be from modern elephants. Now, what were they doing east of Shetland?
The shipping records of 1689 gave Long his answer. War in the English Channel caused ships to divert around northern Britain. Hidden in archives in Holland, he found the papers relating to a convoy of 4 Dutch traders. These had foundered and sunk in a storm.
The fourth ship, which was the Wapen van Alkmaar, had actually set sail from what's called Sri Lanka these days. And that was well known as the major ivory exporting from the Indian subcontinent. That most ivory came out of that area. And that ship is recorded as having been lost to the east of Shetland. My feeling is that that is probably the most likely vessel from which these elephant tusks have come from, that they are modern elephant tusks brought by a ship, not a mammoth which happened to be wandering around in the North Sea 50,000 years ago.
The solutions to the mysteries of the Chinese anchors and the Scottish tusks are intriguing and ingenious, but they won't change our view of the past. For archaeologists, the greatest prize is a discovery which gives a real insight into the thinking of extinct civilizations. One rare example of this came after centuries of research into the great temples of the ancient Greeks. An enormous amount is known about them, but what happened to the architect's blueprints?
The Temple of Didyma in Turkey was built in honor of Apollo. The god of light, art and prophecy was said to have been conceived under a nearby laurel tree. For generations, tourists and archaeologists have been awed by the building's staggering beauty. German researcher Lothar Hasselberger has been studying the building since he first came here in 1979.
The architect, he was just genius. The amount of refinement that boils down here in fractions of inches, and it's just a tiny detail of this giant building, and this created this beauty that we are still amazed of.
Lothar learned the temple's history, but no one knew how the architects had planned it, until he took a walk amongst the ruins one afternoon.
I was here one day just wandering around and looking at the wonderful and unparalleled construction, and all of a sudden I realized, my goodness, there are incised lines that all of a sudden melt together into quarter circle and semicircles and yet another sequence of quarter circles, exactly the way they are executed out in the temple. It showed up in such a brilliance and clarity that I had no doubts these are the one-to-one scale drawings of the construction plans for this very temple.
To check his discovery, Lothar used mirrors to throw light onto the faint scratchings. He had found the blueprint for the columns.
What we are looking at here, the outline, the bent outline of the shaft, that towards the bottom of the column ends in a profile, the quarter circle of which I'm following, and after a little step it ends in a semicircular profile where we can actually see even the center points for inserting the pair of dividers.
Lothar drew out the plans. He found that the architects had altered their workings, but they were a perfect match for the finished pillars. An accident of history had given Lothar this chance of a lifetime discovery.
I was able to find these drawings because the temple was left unfinished at the end of antiquity. These drawings were, of course, meant to be taken away, erased again. This, however, didn't happen because the temple as a whole wasn't finished, and it's due to that we are able to stand in front of unfinished walls bearing the entire set of full-scale plans as if standing in the architect's design office, left by the people just going out for lunch, and we are able to look over their shoulders.
Lothar examined every inch of the walls with meticulous care. He found horizontal lines representing the column shafts.
It's impossible to assume that the ancient master builders were exposed to this cumbersome procedure of reading their own plans. By looking more closely along the wall surfaces, I discovered in certain areas traces of reddish mineral pigments. And to cut a long story short, the entire wall surface intended for the drawings was covered with this reddish iron oxide, and I must say they stand up quite clearly against the reddish background. After having understood what I have seen, one thing was clear to me. This is a much more general answer than just resolving the design of this very temple. It's, on the whole, the answer of how Greek buildings had been designed.
Well, the moral of these stories is this. Apparently insoluble mysteries may turn out to have simple solutions. But one thing is clear, the key to unlocking the past that you can't do without is good old-fashioned luck.